There is a manipulation tactic where abusers make their targets responsible for managing the abuser's emotions. It is called emotional outsourcing. Imagine carrying a weight everywhere you go. Not a physical weight, an emotional one. Every decision you make, every word you say, every silence you hold. You are not just living your life, you are navigating someone else's emotional minefield. You are not just responsible for your own reactions anymore, you are responsible for theirs. And that, right there, is one of the most devastating forms of psychological control ever devised, because the abuser doesn't need to threaten you. They've made you threaten yourself. This is the responsibility inversion, the manipulation tactic where abusers systematically transfer ownership of their emotional reactions onto their targets. Instead of the abuser being accountable for their own anger, disappointment, and distress, that accountability shifts onto you. You become the keeper of their emotional stability, and here is what makes it so insidious. You never agreed to this job. But somehow, you can't stop performing it. The phrase, "you made me feel this way," seems innocent on the surface. It sounds like emotional honesty. But in the context of manipulation, it is a precision instrument of control. When an abuser says you are making me angry, they're doing several things simultaneously. They're denying responsibility for their own emotional regulation. They're assigning blame for their internal state to you. And they're creating an implicit mandate. If you want them to feel better, you must change your behavior. Let's talk about what this produces in the target, because the outcome is a person who is exhaustively, continuously self-monitoring. Every interaction becomes a risk assessment. Did I say the right thing? Will this make them angry? Should I bring this up, or will it upset them? Should I go to this event, or will they feel abandoned? The target becomes their own internal censor, their own compliance officer, all running 24 hours a day, and they do this work voluntarily. That is what makes it so effective. To understand why this works so reliably, we need to understand how emotional responsibility gets misframed. In healthy relationships, there is mutual consideration. If my partner is having a bad day, I might be thoughtful about it. But there is a crucial difference. I am not responsible for their bad day. I don't own it. In manipulative dynamics, that distinction collapses. The target absorbs full responsibility for the manipulator's entire emotional landscape. And once you've internalized that you are the cause of someone's distress, the solution seems obvious. Fix yourself so they can feel better. Here is what is really happening beneath the surface. The manipulator is engineering emotional dependency. By making you responsible for their feelings, they ensure you can never leave. Because if you leave, they'll be devastated, they'll be lost, they'll fall apart. At least that is the narrative. So you stay. You manage. You regulate. You become so invested in their emotional well-being that your own becomes an afterthought. This is the dependency trap, and it is built on a foundation of misallocated responsibility. Living in this dynamic takes a psychological toll that researchers call hypervigilance, the chronic state of being on high alert for threats. For targets of responsibility inversion, the threats are everywhere: a change in tone, a sigh, a period of silence, a look. These become warning signs that must be decoded and responded to immediately. The target develops an almost supernatural ability to read emotional micro-expressions, predicting outbursts before they happen. This skill doesn't develop because the target is naturally gifted at emotional intelligence. It develops because their survival depends on it. Central to responsibility inversion is guilt, specifically manufactured guilt. The manipulator induces guilt by framing their emotional distress as the target's fault. They might say things like, "After everything I've done for you, this is how you make me feel." Or, "You obviously don't care about me." Each of these statements accomplishes the same task. Guilt is activated, and the target's natural response is to apologize, to back down, to change course. The manipulator has successfully used their own emotional reaction as a compliance tool without ever making a direct demand. Let's be very clear about what this dynamic actually asks of the target. It is an impossible job. The target is being asked to control another adult human's internal emotional state through their own behavior. This is something that no human being can reliably accomplish. You cannot make another person feel a certain way. You cannot prevent them from feeling anger, disappointment, or distress through sheer force of your own actions. But in this dynamic, the target is assigned responsibility for this impossible task, and blamed when they inevitably fail. Responsibility inversion is a cornerstone of DARVO, one of the most reliable manipulation frameworks. DARVO stands for deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. When a target tries to address the manipulator's behavior, the manipulator denies their role, attacks the target's credibility, and reverses the dynamic, positioning themselves as the injured party. Notice how this reversal works. The manipulator's own harmful behavior becomes the target's fault. the responsibility inversion completes itself. One of the most disorienting aspects of this tactic is that it often sounds reasonable on the surface. Of course, we should consider how our actions affect each other. Relationships require sensitivity. I wouldn't have reacted that way if you hadn't done X. These statements carry an internal logic that can be hard to argue with, until you see what is underneath. What is underneath is the transfer of accountability. The manipulator is using the legitimate concept of mutual consideration as a tool to offload their own emotional regulation entirely. Over time, the target's nervous system adapts to this dynamic. What should register as abnormal, the constant need to manage someone else's emotions, becomes normalized. The target's baseline shifts. They stop questioning why they're exhausted. They stop noticing how much mental space the manipulator's emotional state occupies. They stop recognizing that their own needs, preferences, and boundaries have become negotiable at best, invisible at worst. This normalization is critical to the manipulator's success. Because the target spends so much energy managing the manipulator's emotions, something happens to their sense of self. Their decisions get made in reference to the manipulator. Their moods fluctuate based on the manipulator's moods. Their goals, preferences, and even personality traits begin to orient around the manipulator's needs. This is identity erosion, not through direct attacks on who the target is, but through the gradual redirection of the target's entire psychological energy towards someone else's emotional well-being. Let's examine a specific manifestation: weaponized disappointment. The manipulator expresses disappointment in the target, not through direct confrontation, but through sighs, withdrawal, heavy silences, or phrases like "I expected more from you," or "I am just disappointed." This is responsibility inversion in action. The manipulator is signaling their emotional state without directly owning it. The target is left to interpret, to decode, to figure out what they did wrong and what they need to do to fix it. Targets of responsibility inversion often develop elaborate protocols for preventing outbursts. These can include never bringing up certain topics, always deferring to the manipulator's preferences, preemptively apologizing before conversations that might be difficult, and strategically managing information to avoid triggering negative reactions. These protocols become so ingrained that the target may not even recognize them as abnormal. They feel like necessary precautions, but they're actually evidence of a profound power imbalance. Responsibility inversion serves a critical narrative function for the manipulator. It constructs their victimhood by framing themselves as the injured party, the one who is hurt and mistreated by the target. The manipulator recruits outside sympathy. When the target tries to talk about their experience, the manipulator's narrative is already in place. The target, who has been exhaustively managing the manipulator's emotions, now faces a credibility problem. The manipulator's calm exterior becomes evidence against the target. When responsibility inversion is in full effect, the target takes on blame for everything: the manipulator's anger, the target's fault, the manipulator's disappointment, the target's inadequacy, the manipulator's distress, the target's failure. This creates a self-blame spiral, a cognitive pattern where the target attributes all negative outcomes to themselves, regardless of the actual cause. And because the manipulator has successfully positioned themselves as the injured party, the target has no external reference point for comparison. Responsibility inversion also serves to isolate the target. Because the target is so consumed with managing the manipulator's emotions, they have less capacity for other relationships. Their energy is depleted, their attention is fractured, their availability is restricted. Over time, friends and family fade away, not necessarily because the manipulator has actively sabotaged these relationships, but because the target is no longer present in them. The manipulator's emotional demands have colonized the target's social bandwidth. This tactic synergizes powerfully with gaslighting. When the target begins to recognize that something is wrong, that they're exhausted and constantly walking on eggshells, the manipulator responds with denial and reality distortion. "You are overreacting. That never happened. You are too sensitive." These responses are designed to make the target question their own perceptions. Combined with responsibility inversion, this creates a perfect trap. The target feels responsible for the manipulator's emotions. But when they try to articulate their experience, their reality is denied. Psychologist Arlie Hochschild coined the term emotional labor to describe the work of managing emotions as part of a job or role. In manipulative dynamics, the target performs enormous emotional labor on behalf of the manipulator. They regulate the manipulator's emotional environment. They anticipate emotional needs. They intervene to prevent emotional crises. They absorb emotional fallout. This is unpaid, unacknowledged work that benefits only the manipulator, and it is extracted through responsibility inversion. Targets of responsibility inversion often find themselves apologizing excessively, not for specific harmful actions they've taken, but for their existence, their needs, their boundaries. I am sorry for bringing this up. I am sorry you feel that way. I am sorry I am such a burden. These apologies provide momentary relief from the manipulator's emotional pressure, but they also reinforce the target's identity as someone who is inherently at fault. Over time, the target's default emotional state becomes apology. Manipulators often present their emotional reactions as constraints on the target's options. If you do X, I'll be devastated. If you go there, I'll feel abandoned. These aren't direct demands, they're framings that limit the target's choices through guilt. The target faces a false choice: do what they want, or manage the manipulator's reaction. The manipulator has engineered a choice landscape where the target's autonomy is nominally preserved, but practically constrained. In family systems, responsibility inversion often manifests as parentification. When a child is forced to take care of a parent's emotional needs, the child becomes the caretaker. They manage the parent's moods. They intervene to prevent parental conflict. They sacrifice their own developmental needs to maintain the parent's stability. This pattern, when it occurs in adult relationships, is essentially the same dynamic. One party is assigned responsibility for another party's emotional regulation. The target of responsibility inversion enters an exhaustion cycle that they cannot escape through rest. The fatigue isn't physical, it is cognitive and emotional. The target is tired from constant monitoring, predicting, decoding, and adjusting. Even when the manipulator is absent, the target carries the mental model of the manipulator's emotional landscape. They rehearse conversations. They anticipate reactions. They strategize compliance. This mental work continues even during sleep. There is a paradox at the center of responsibility inversion. The target is assigned total responsibility for the manipulator's emotions, but they're given no actual authority. They can't control the manipulator's emotions. They can't mandate change. They can only influence them through their own behavior, which means they're constantly trying to solve an equation where they control only one variable. Meanwhile, the manipulator retains all the power. This is the fundamental unfairness of the dynamic responsibility without authority, blame without control. Responsibility inversion creates persistent cognitive dissonance in the target. Cognitive dissonance is the psychological discomfort that arises when we hold two conflicting beliefs. In this case, the target believes, I am a caring, considerate person, and my partner is suffering because of my behavior. These beliefs create tension. The target resolves this tension not by questioning the second belief. The target has been conditioned not to question the manipulator's framing, but by overperforming care and over-adjusting behavior. Over time, the target's entire reality becomes distorted by responsibility inversion. Their perception of normal relationships is warped. Their sense of what is acceptable becomes malleable. Their intuition about manipulation becomes compromised. This reality distortion field is the manipulator's greatest achievement, not because they've made the target believe something false, but because they've made the target disbelieve what is true. The target's own experience becomes inaccessible to them. Here is the cruelest irony. The target cannot escape this dynamic through the very mechanism that defines it, managing the manipulator's emotions. The target may think, if I can just do better, be better, anticipate better, then the manipulator will be okay. But the manipulator's emotional instability isn't a problem to be solved. It is a tool. As long as the target believes they can solve it, they remain engaged. The manipulator's distress isn't a symptom of the target's failure. It is the mechanism of control. Recovery from responsibility inversion requires a fundamental reattribution of emotional ownership. The target must learn that they are not responsible for other people's emotions, only for their own. This is different from not caring, not considering, or not supporting. It is the recognition that emotional regulation is an individual capacity, not an interpersonal debt. The target must also rebuild their capacity to tolerate the manipulator's discomfort. That distress belongs to the manipulator. Managing it is not the target's job. The first step toward recovery is recognition. If you've been absorbing responsibility for someone else's emotional reactions, if you've been walking on eggshells, pre-apologizing, monitoring moods, and feeling like everything is your fault, this is your signal. This pattern you are living in isn't your fault, but it is also not something you can fix by trying harder, being better, or caring more. It can only be addressed by recognizing what is happening, naming it for what it is, and beginning the slow, courageous work of reclaiming responsibility for your own emotional life.